You cannot see it, you cannot smell it, you cannot taste it, you will not feel it enter your lungs. It has no warning, no odor, no color, no immediate symptom that tells your body something is wrong. It is just there, seeping up through the soil, through the rock, through the foundation of the house where you sleep. And it is killing people. Radon gas is the #1 cause of lung cancer among non-smokers in the United States. The EPA estimates it is responsible for approximately 21,000 lung cancer deaths every year, 21,000 people every year, from something most of them never knew was there. Radon is a direct byproduct of uranium decay. It forms wherever uranium exists in the ground. And the communities that live closest to uranium mining and milling operations, the communities that drink the water, breathe the air, and wash the dust off their families at the end of the day, have been living with elevated radon and radiation exposure for decades. Some of them knew, most of them did not. The federal government knew before they did. In-Situ recovery is a fundamentally different method than the mining that produced the Shiprock disaster and the rifle tailings piles. That is true, and it is worth saying clearly. Instead of digging a pit or blasting underground tunnels, ISR drills a network of wells into a uranium-bearing sandstone formation. A water-based solution in the United States, typically a mixture of oxygen and sodium bicarbonate near neutral pH, is injected down into the formation. That solution dissolves the uranium in place. The uranium-bearing water is pumped back to the surface, processed, and the water is returned underground. No open pit, no waste rock piled on the surface, no tailings, no massive earth-moving equipment, no airborne radioactive dust from milling operations. Compared to what was done at Shiprock and Rifle, ISR has a genuinely smaller surface footprint. The radioactive decay products stay underground rather than being dug up and piled in the open air. The physical disruption to the landscape is dramatically less. Those are real differences. They matter. A method that does not create another rifle tailings pile is meaningfully better than one that does. Now let's look at what ISR does not solve. The central promise of ISR is this. When the uranium is gone, the company restores the groundwater to its original condition and leaves. That is the regulatory requirement. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission requires complete restoration of groundwater to baseline conditions before a license is terminated. It sounds straightforward. Here is what the NRC's own documents say about how that has worked in practice. The NRC published a technical report, NUREG CR 6870, specifically examining groundwater restoration at ISR facilities. Its conclusion, in the NRC's own words, although ISR techniques are considered more environmentally benign than traditional mining, they still tend to contaminate the groundwater. That is not an environmental group, that is the regulator, their own research document. The NRC also acknowledges, on the record, that although ISR permits require complete restoration of groundwater after mining, some baseline parameters have proved to be unachievable by mining companies. Unachievable. The United States Geological Survey went further. In a formal analysis of ISR mines in Texas, the state with the most ISR uranium mining experience in the country, researchers found that every single production area received amended restoration goals. Everyone. What does amended restoration goals mean in plain language? It means the company could not restore the groundwater to the levels required, so the required levels were changed. The standard was lowered to match what the company could actually achieve. They could not clean it up, so they moved the goalposts. There is a word you will not find in the company brochures. It is a regulatory term. The word is excursion. An excursion occurs when the uranium-bearing fluid moves beyond the permitted mining zone and into adjacent unimpacted groundwater. In other words, the fluid goes where it is not supposed to go, into the aquifer next door. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission acknowledges that excursions do happen at numerous ISR facilities. Numerous. The documented sites where excursions have occurred and are on the NRC record include Christensen Ranch in Wyoming, Highland in Wyoming, Smith Ranch in Wyoming, Crow Butte in Nebraska, Kingsville Dome in Texas, Rosita in Texas, Bruni in Texas. These are not hypothetical concerns raised by opponents. These are documented operational incidents at regulated facilities, facilities operating under the same regulatory framework enCore Energy would operate under at Dewey Burdock. The groundwater contamination from excursions is, in the NRC's words, usually local. but can be serious, usually local. That is the regulatory standard being applied to the aquifer system under the Black Hills. There is something in the ISR permitting process that most people in affected communities never hear about until it is too late to change it. Before the first well is drilled, before the first drop of lixiviant goes into the ground, the ore body aquifer must be exempted from the Safe Drinking Water Act. That is not a criticism. That is the legal mechanism that allows ISR to operate. The aquifer where the uranium sits is formally designated as a non-potable source, one that cannot be used as a future underground source of drinking water. The exemption is granted before mining begins. It is built into the permitting structure. The aquifer that hosts the ore body is permanently removed from drinking water protection before a single well produces uranium. The company's argument is that these aquifers already contain uranium at levels that make them unsuitable for drinking water. In many cases, particularly the Wyoming and Texas sandstone formations where ISR has operated, that argument has merit. Those are isolated, brackish formations with no connection to potable water supplies. The question, the one that the Black Hills Clean Water Alliance has been asking since 2009, is whether the Dewey Burdock Formation is hydrologically isolated in the same way. The Black Hills are not Wyoming. The geology is different. The Madison and Minnelusa formations that run through the Black Hills supply water to ranchers, farmers, and communities across western South Dakota. Whether Dewey Burdock's sandstone is genuinely isolated from those formations is exactly the kind of site-specific question that requires more than a fast-tracked federal approval to answer. So here is what the record shows on ISR. The method is genuinely better than open-pit mining for surface disturbance. That is documented and true. The method does not eliminate groundwater risk. The NRC's own research says ISR still tends to contaminate groundwater. That is documented and true. Restoration to baseline conditions is required by regulation. It has proved unachievable at every Texas ISR mine studied by the U.S. Geological Survey. That is documented and true. Excursions have occurred at multiple regulated ISR facilities across Wyoming, Nebraska, and Texas. That is documented and true. The data on long-term groundwater impacts from ISR is, in the USGS's own words, poorly understood because records archiving these impacts are difficult to locate. That is documented and true. Now add one more fact. I was in Garfield County, Colorado in 2006 during the fracking boom. I watched what restoration promises looked like in practice. In the same valley, on the same water table, in a community told the technology was clean and the monitoring was sufficient and the water would be fine. I watched what happened when the companies left and the monitoring lapses came and the water questions didn't have clean answers anymore. ISR is not fracking. The chemistry is different. The regulatory framework is different. The scale is different. But the pattern of promised restoration versus documented reality, that pattern I have seen before. In Garfield County, in Rifle, in the valley I drove through for a decade, the industry's argument is that ISR is better than what came before. Better than Shiprock? The documents say yes. Better than Rifle? The documents say yes. But better than Shiprock is not the same as safe. And the question was never whether ISR is better than 1950s open pit mining. The question is whether it is safe enough for the Black Hills aquifer system that supplies water to ranchers, farmers, and communities across western South Dakota. That question has not been answered. The BLM approval does not answer it. Water is not an abstraction. It is what comes out of the tap on a ranch in Fall River County. It is what flows through the creeks the Lakota have named for generations. It is what the cattle drink, what the gardens grow in, what the kids swim in on a hot July afternoon. Once an aquifer is exempted from the Safe Drinking Water Act, it cannot be unexempted. Once groundwater restoration goals are amended downward because the company could not meet them, the original baseline is gone. Once an excursion moves uranium-bearing fluid into an adjacent formation, the monitoring well catches it after it has already moved. The industry says this technology is better. On surface disturbance, the documents support that. On groundwater, the documents say the story is not finished, and in some places it did not end well. The Black Hills deserve a complete answer, not a fast-tracked one. The documents are in the description. This is Words with Wentz. Know the truth.
Let the signal cut through the noise. Reading trace, unlocking time and space, finding truth with whence. Words with